December 17th, 1944. The bitter cold of the Ardennes forest wraps its icy fingers around the weary soldiers. Darkness presses down like a heavy shroud, pierced by the sharp crack of artillery shells echoing through the pines. Mud-slick roads freeze underfoot, and the stench of diesel and fear hangs thick in the air. You can almost feel the biting wind slicing through thick wool coats and the sweat-dampened helmets of the men. Somewhere ahead, the dense forest is alive with movement-faint whispers of frantic footsteps, the low rumble of tanks grinding along narrow paths. This is no ordinary night. It is the cusp of a nightmare and a miracle. General George S. Patton sits rigid in his command jeep, maps spread across his lap, illuminated by a flickering lantern. His eyes, sharp and calculating beneath furrowed brows, cut through the darkness. Reports from the front are dire German forces have launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes, striking a vulnerable point in the Allied lines. The battle has suddenly twisted, threatening to unravel months of hard-won gains. Patton knows that standing still means disaster. The clock is unforgiving. Somewhere behind him, the thrum of fighter planes roars overhead, fighting to keep the skies clear as chaos swirls below. Then the order arrives, the command that will force Patton's hand, demanding a redirection of his entire Third Army. But not just a simple redeployment, a lightning-fast pivot that will require every ounce of his leadership, daring, and tactical genius. Behind the scenes at Eisenhower's command tent, tension simmers almost as fiercely as on the front lines. Intelligence officers pore over reports, the weight of the situation pressing down. Eisenhower's voice is steady, but grave as he speaks to his staff. Patton has 48 hours. 48 hours to turn the tide. Or we lose everything. What happens in those next 2 days will echo through history. It will be a testament to audacity and the raw will to prevail. The question on everyone's lips is simple. Can Patton pull off the impossible? The forest waits. The frozen mud clings to Patton's boots as he strides through the command post. Every man here feels the weight of the moment, for this is not simply another operation. It is a desperate gamble against time and fate. The German offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, has shattered quiet confidence and thrown the Allied front into chaos. Patton's Third Army had been advancing steadily eastward for weeks, pushing deep into the heart of Nazi territory. But now, with the German armored divisions cutting wide wedges through the thinly held American lines, entire towns risked falling back into enemy hands. Relief was needed and fast. Orders crackle over the radio. General Patton, you are to shift your entire force northward to relieve the besieged town of Bastogne and blunt the German spearhead. A maneuver of this scale, given the winter conditions, stretched supply lines thin and threatened to exhaust personnel. Yet Patton's mind is already racing. He knows the terrain intimately, the narrow roads, the dense woods, the treacherous hills. He envisions his armored columns twisting and turning through the freezing mist, engines grinding, tracks tearing ice and mud. Time is his enemy, but also, surprisingly, his ally. The Germans could not expect such a rapid response. Patton's reputation is built on bold moves and relentless momentum. His staff officers scramble to plan routes, marshal reserves, and ready tank battalions. Meanwhile, rear echelon units hustle to stockpile fuel and ammunition. In the background, intense discussions unfold on communication security, air support availability, and tactical priorities. Pinned in by harsh weather and tight timetables, Patton refuses to compromise. Fortune favors the bold, he says in a low, commanding voice. We turn on a dime or we break. Back in Eisenhower's headquarters, news of Patton's directive spreads swiftly. There are questions. Is this move feasible? Can the Third Army respond without jeopardizing its own lines? Eisenhower's staff balances urgency with caution, aware that the success or failure of this operation may determine the fate of the war in the Ardennes. As midnight ticks forward, Headlights pierce the black wilderness. Tanks roar to life, engines spewing clouds of steam into the freezing air. Soldiers jostle for position, knowing every second lost could cost lives. The gamble is underway. Patton's legendary push is no longer a theory. It is a brutal, live reality. But even as the columns push forward, unseen shadows lengthen along the road ahead. The German forces, entrenched and ruthless, have set brutal traps. The real test is only just beginning. The headlights of Patton's armored columns cast long, flickering shadows against the snow-laden trees. Engines throb violently, metal grinding against icy ruts as tanks and half-tracks lumber through the Ardennes. You can almost hear the relentless clatter of tracks tearing through frozen earth, mingling with the groans of fatigued men gripping the wheel, their breaths misting in the frigid air. The roads, narrow and winding, are choked with the procession of war machines. Supply trucks struggle alongside Sherman tanks, their wheels slipping on ice patches. Drivers curse under their breath, desperately trying to maintain momentum, knowing that a single stall could block the entire route. Every minute counts, not just against the enemy, but against the creeping frost nipping at exposed skin. Patton's voice echoes through radio static, commanding and calm despite the chaos. Move fast, move hard. We make this term regardless of what stands in our way. But the enemy has prepared for this. German artillery lays down barrages that shake the ground, sending clouds of snow erupting into the air. Anti-tank squads lurk in the woods, waiting for snarled columns to give them openings. Every mile forward is purchased at the price of metal and blood. Letters from the front describe the scene with harrowing detail. Both men and machines swallowed by the unforgiving cold and the forest's relentless maze. The frozen silence between explosions is broken only by terse, hurried commands and the distant wail of wounded soldiers. Inside one half-track, young Private James McAllister grips his rifle tight. His fingers numb and face smeared with grime, he peers into the darkness, the eerie glow of phosphorescent tracer rounds streaking past. Feels like the forest itself is fighting us, he mutters. Across the command line, General Patton reviews updates. Tank battalions have reached forward positions. Infantry units are regrouping, supply chains strained but holding. His jaw tightens. It's a brutal march, but momentum is his weapon. Meanwhile, in Eisenhower's command tent hundreds of miles away, the commander-in-chief watches the tactical maps smeared with red and green markers. The lines shift unpredictably as reports arrive. With a grim expression, Eisenhower turns to his staff. If Patton pulls this off, the German offensive will falter. If he doesn't, we're in real trouble. The Ardennes night deepens. The Third Army presses on, every man knowing this could be the last push before the heart of the enemy's advance is shattered or before they themselves become the shattered. On this frozen hellscape, time becomes a weapon relentless, merciless. The small town of Bastogne sits at the crossroads like a prize glittering just out of reach. Its narrow streets, framed by half-frozen stone buildings, have become a fortress under siege. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded and outnumbered, holds the town with fierce determination, but supplies are running low, and the enemy's grasp tightens like a noose. Inside Bastogne's command post, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe pores over maps, radio crackling with intermittent voices. Morale is strained, but the men are resolute, their grit forged in the crucible of relentless fighting. Then, distant but approaching, the unmistakable rumble of tanks and artillery. Patton's Third Army is coming. The sound gains strength, a beacon slicing through despair. Soldiers wipe soot from their faces and steel themselves for the long-awaited relief. The knowledge that reinforcements are near fuels a flicker of hope amidst the bitter cold and shattered streets. Patton's forces don't just arrive, they strike with overwhelming fury. The advance columns slam into German positions with the weight of steel and firepower. tearing through pillboxes and ambushes. The tank's roaring engines become the heartbeat of salvation, yet the German commanders will not yield easily. They churn reserves from the shadows. Artillery thunderclaps echo in close quarters, and snipers lurk in shattered windows, taking deadly aim. The battle rages, blood mixing with snow in muddy craters. Infantry charges and armored assaults collide under a sky heavy with smoke and desperation. Patton directs the fight with frantic energy, shouting orders, repositioning troops, demanding every soldier squeeze out every ounce of strength. Throughout the chaos, a message cuts through the noise. Nuts! General McAuliffe's legendary one-word reply to a German surrender ultimatum, a defiant stand that steels the defenders' resolve. Back at Eisenhower's headquarters, the news of Patton's armored breakthrough arrives. Relief flickers across faces worn thin by worry. The tide is turning, but the cost has been brutal, and the war is far from over. As night falls and the guns briefly fall silent, a deeper realization settles in. This was not merely a relief. It was a tempest of will, courage, and raw determination that will echo through history. But just as the battle seems to shift in favor of the Allies, an ominous discovery comes to light. A threat lurking in the dark that could unravel everything they fought to gain. Amid the temporary calm that blankets Bastogne and its shattered outskirts, intelligence officers scramble over fresh reconnaissance reports. Satellite images aside, word trickles in from scouts. German counterattacks, not just desperate but cunning, are gathering strength on flanks previously thought secure. Patton's rapid advance, as brilliant as it is, has stretched supply lines thin and left gaps exposed. The Ardennes terrain, dense with towering firs and shadowed ravines, hides swarming enemy units ready to exploit any weakness. Inside the command post, Patton studies the latest information with a tight jaw. His mind, always racing ahead, calculates risks that weigh heavily against his aggressive strategy. Fuel depots are low, trucks delayed by bombed-out bridges, and winter storms threaten to stall the precious columns that carried him this far. Suddenly, radio voices crackle with urgency reports of enemy armored divisions regrouping, preparing surprise night strikes to retake lost ground and isolate Patton's forces from Bastogne. The tension tightens like a drawn wire. What began as a swift, audacious maneuver faces a new, menacing test. In the dim glow of map lamps, Patton's eyes harden. There's no room for hesitation. "We hold Bastogne at all costs," he commands, voice sharp as a winter gale. "But we prepare to fight shadows and shadows alone, if that is what it takes." Outside, the forest seems to press inward, alive with unseen threats. Fire teams crawl on hands and knees, laying mines under bitter winds, while artillery crews reposition guns through frozen mud. Every man senses the trap tightening. Back at Eisenhower's war room, faces are grave. The gamble has paid off, but now Patton's resolve must carry the day against an enemy desperate and cunning. The question remains, how long can this fragile lifeline hold before the Ardennes swallows it whole? Night deepens, cloaking the forest in darkness, so thick it feels almost alive, as if the trees themselves await an inevitable storm. Far from frozen roads and shattered towns, the nerve center of the Allied effort buzzes with urgent activity. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force Eisenhower's domain is a hive of tension and calculation. The commander sits behind a battered oak desk, maps sprawled and markers tracking Patton's rapid advance. His face is calm, but behind the steady gaze lies the unbearable weight of command, every decision rippling with consequences measured in lives and miles of Europe. Eisenhower's staff surrounds him, voices low but urgent. Briefings fly back and forth. Logistics, troop morale, enemy movements. The reports paint a picture fraught with danger, but laced with hope. When updates on Patton's audacious pivot arrive, Eisenhower leans forward, eyes narrowing. 48 hours, he murmurs, more to himself than anyone else. 48 hours to change everything. He knows the gamble is enormous. Orders to redirect an entire army across frozen, hostile terrain with barely a day's notice could either save the front or doom it. More than military precision, it demands unyielding faith in Patton's nerve, in his vision, and in sheer American grit. Staff officers ask questions. Contingency plans are drawn and redrawn. Yet Eisenhower's decision is final. He trusts Patton's instinct where maps blur and soldiers' resolve is forged. Outside the war room, whispers spread. This move could become the turning point. Yet Eisenhower chooses silence, letting the fate of thousands unfold in the cold Ardennes night. The hours tick down. With every dawn, the battlefield changes, as do the lives pinned on this daring plan. Will the Third Army's fury break the German grip, or will silence fall across these frozen woods forever? The first light of dawn fractures through heavy clouds, casting a cold gray pallor over the battered Ardennes. The soundscape is alive. Distant artillery booms, the steady rumble of approaching armor, and the urgent clang of orders shouted above the freezing wind. Patton's forces push forward relentlessly, their pace driven not just by orders, but by a collective will hardened by weeks of grueling combat. Tank commanders scan the tree lines, ever mindful of hidden enemy anti-tank teams. Infantry squads move in tight formations, weapons ready, nerves stretched taut. The narrow roads are choke points, but Patton's engineers work feverishly clearing wreckage, repairing bridges, and creating new routes to keep the advance steady. Supply convoys, vital lifelines bringing fuel, food, and ammunition, snake their way through hazards scarred by battle. Against these odds, the Third Army shows the tenacity that defines Patton's leadership. Radio reports detail the gradual reclaiming of key crossroads and defensive positions once lost. Each new objective taken flares hope, igniting the spirit of the men who fought through bitter cold and relentless fire. Yet in the rear, a deeper tension simmers. The enemy is regrouping, launching counterattacks intended not just to slow Patton, but to rip the entire operation apart. The Ardennes is a cauldron of violence and uncertainty. Amid it all, Patton's voice remains a steady rhythm on the radio, a pulse that keeps the rhythm of this desperate waltz. Keep the pressure. No stopping now. Back at Eisenhower's headquarters, every success is met with wary optimism. Each mile gained chips away at the German offensive, but the war is still far from won. As the sun sets, a sense of something larger taking shape, an unstoppable force born of grit, strategy, and sheer determination. But with victory in sight, a chilling question hangs. What price will this momentum demand before the battle truly turns? As the days grind forward, the fierce push through the Ardennes begins to exact an unforgiving toll. The ground is a labyrinth of frozen craters and battered, vehicles reminding every soldier of the price paid for each hard-won yard. The faces of the men moving through this winter hell are etched with exhaustion. Frostbite steals fingers and toes. Hunger gnaws at bellies. Sleep is a broken luxury, stolen in brief moments between firefights. The persistent drone of artillery and the crack of machine guns blend into a relentless soundtrack of war. Patton's staff constantly adjusts plans to keep the advance moving, balancing the demands of speed with the limits of men and machines pushed to their breaking points. Fuel shortages force desperate rationing, and replacement troops flood into battered units, their eyes wide with the harsh reality of this brutal counteroffensive. Leaders in the field make split-second decisions loaded with life or death stakes. Every crossroads recaptured, every German position smashed, is a testament to determination, but also a reminder of comrades lost. Back in Eisenhower's headquarters, news of mounting casualties arrives with grim regularity. The burden weighs heavily on commanders far from the front lines, who must reconcile high command's objectives with the human cost. Yet amidst the brutality, moments of valor sparkle like fire in the dark. Stories circulate of small squads holding off overwhelming odds, medics braving sniper fire to save wounded men, and tank crews charging through icy forests to reach the front. With Patton driving his men forward, the tide is turning, but the question that lingers is one of endurance. How long can this relentless push continue before the strain breaks the army's spirit? In the cold Ardennes night, the answer remains uncertain. The breakthrough emerges almost subtly one moment, a tense hush, the next, a thunderous surge. Patton's forces, after pushing through dense woods and frozen roads, reach the outskirts of Bastogne. Relief waves through the encircled 101st Airborne as the sound of tanks and artillery fire edges closer. The town's defenders, battle-weary but undaunted, catch sight of familiar camouflage uniforms and armored vehicles cutting through the fog. Men raise rifles and voices in ragged cheers, a sound echoing far beyond the walls of Bastogne. Patton's arrival is not just a moment of physical relief. It is a psychological hammer blow to the German offensive. What had seemed an unstoppable tide is now confronted with the iron will of the Third Army, blazing through impossible odds to strike at the enemy's vulnerable flank. Meanwhile, Eisenhower and his staff at Supreme Headquarters feel the tension begin to lift. Communications crackle with reports. The German advance is faltering, supply chains are compromised, and morale is flagging. History is in motion. But the full magnitude of Patton's achievement remains almost incomprehensible. Redirecting thousands of troops, artillery, and armored vehicles across unforgiving terrain in only 48 hours defied conventional military wisdom. It was a masterstroke of logistics, leadership, and sheer grit. The battlefield's harsh reality is undeniable scarred men and shattered machines bear witness to an operation fought at the edge of human endurance. Yet the war's momentum unmistakably favors the Allies. Yet as the dust settles, a silent question lingers in the frostbitten air. What deeper challenges await beyond this pivotal victory as the Allied forces prepare to push relentlessly toward Berlin? Patton's gamble has paid off, but the war is far from over. The roar of battle fades into a brittle silence as the snow settles over the Ardennes once more. Patton's Third Army has carved a path through chaos, turning a desperate crisis into a stepping stone for eventual victory. Yet beneath this hard-won success lies a landscape scarred by sacrifice. Soldiers tend to wounds both visible and invisible as medics move swiftly to patch shattered bodies and spirits alike. The frozen forest bears countless reminders: abandoned equipment, makeshift graves, and whispered memories carried in the wind. In command posts now filled with subdued relief, Patton allows himself a brief moment to reflect. His reputation as a commander forged in fire is cemented by this rapid, masterful maneuver. But the cost weighs heavily: the lives lost, the families affected. Across the Channel, Eisenhower pens a confidential report to Allied leaders, a testament to the leadership, resilience, and courage that shaped those crucial 48 hours. He recognizes that without Patton's audacity, the course of the war might have shifted in darkest ways. Historians will later call this moment one of the most remarkable operational feats of World War II, a swift, decisive pivot that stopped a potentially catastrophic German breakthrough. Yet beyond the strategy and statistics is the human story, a story of men enduring the bitter cold, facing the shadow of death, and fighting with unwavering will. It is these untold stories that echo longest through the years. As the Allied forces regroup and advance toward the final chapters of the war, the lessons of the Ardennes remain clear. Boldness, speed, and heart can change the course of history. But for those who lived it, the memory is forever engraved in steel, snow, and scarred flesh.